So a couple weeks ago, I got an email in my business inbox that was entitled Onision in Real Life, streaming exclusively on Discover Plus beginning January 4th. This email was from a person who I had never spoken with before, who works for Discovery Plus, and it basically contained the synopsis for the Onision documentary that Chris Hansen totally for sure didn't sell the rights to. Now, at first, I thought this was a mistake. This email appeared out of nowhere, and seeing as I had never spoken with Investigation Discovery up until this point, I assumed, oh, alright, they accidentally added me to a list. This was an accident. I don't know how they got my email, but they did. So I replied asking why this was sent to me. I wanted to inform whoever the Daffy Duck who slid this my way that they had made an error. But then I got an email back, which stated this. Hi there, we sent the press release to YouTubers because this story started on YouTube, so we wanted YouTube to see it first. That's just kind of weird to me because, fun fact, I don't think I am all of YouTube. I'm not even slightly YouTube, but alright, sure. They then went on to send me a link to the first episode of the documentary and edited it off by saying, I hope you will consider making a commentary video about the story. Signed, irrelevant person who I don't want to dox. Now, when I first got this email, I felt a lot of things. I always feel a lot of things, but the first thing I felt was weirded out, namely because literally everyone who has covered the Onision story any way and had covered what he has done in the past couple years, they had been asked to take part in this documentary. Literally every single other Goon Squad member had been asked to make an on-camera appearance or give their takes on certain actions for the actual documentary, and they had all said no, but I had notably been left out, which was fine, seeing as I would have said no anyway, but still, being in the Goon Squad group chat and hearing that, I felt a little bit like the girl who didn't get asked to the dance, like, what's wrong with me? Why couldn't I have been asked? But secondly, mostly, I felt annoyed, because let me be clear, let me be straight up, let me keep it 100%. This is a massive television network asking me, a singular human who makes YouTube videos in her spare times, to promote a project for them completely for free. This is a company asking me to do work for them for free. This is a massive television network telling me to market their shows simply for the joy and fun of feeling like Investigation Discovery saw little old me on the internet and thought my little peanut brain would feel honored and starstruck by a massive television network talking to me. And that was actually super incredibly disrespectful because they would never go to a television network or an ad agency or wherever you do to shill out ads and say, you should feel honored that we sent this to you first. Please promote us for free. We're not going to pay you, ad agency. We're not going to pay you, person, to get this in front of other people. We just want you to work for us, but we don't care for you. That's kind of a scummy thing to do, again, by a company that is relying entirely on YouTubers like myself to promote this documentary. Like, if you want to capitalize on the audience that YouTube has, maybe do what every other company that utilizes social media marketing does and sponsor us. Be like Raycon, who I love, like actually love. Be like Skillshare. Be like HelloFresh. Be like any number of the sponsors who come to us correctly. But for a company, for a mainstream media company to come to me and say, please shout me out for the sheer delight of it, I didn't gel with that, and I thought it was gross. My one interaction with these people, and I already felt disrespected, and I felt like they disrespected YouTubers as a whole. And basically, that is the best way I can describe this entire documentary. It just feels off. It feels like it's not right, and it feels like that they probably should not have sent it to me early because your girl is going to go in on it right now, right here. Also, before I get into it, I do want to say right here and right now, while I hate the documentary, I don't think it's very entertaining to watch. I love true crime and I thought it was really hokey. Even having watched other true crime content like this, I want to say that even though I don't like the documentary, I don't hate anyone in it, minus Chris Hansen. Actually, no, you know what? I don't hate Chris Hansen. I'm more disappointed in him being willing to accept my docs and just being terrible more than anything. So I don't really hate anyone involved because I think people really did try to make it good. I say that right now because a lot of people who have seen the documentary first and have seen my reaction to it are trying to say that me being friends with Edwin, who does appear in the documentary, is me being hypocritical. And I respectfully disagree. While I personally would not have taken part in this documentary under any circumstances because I think it's trash garbage, I actually respect Edwin a lot for choosing to be part of this because he wanted to make sure it was done right. He wanted to make sure that they had all of the facts, and as someone who has thoroughly documented Onision's disgusting actions for years, he was pretty well suited to do so. Like, Edwin is someone who, even when I disagree with him, I still respect and admire him. I still see the good in his actions, and I don't think this is him selling out or shilling or whatever people are trying to say, because this was an unpopular decision for him to make. And it's really important for me to note that here and now, because I know that will come up in the comments. So now, let's dissect this flaming hot piece of garbage. First, let's start at the beginning, because boy howdy do we need to talk about that. And when I say beginning, I don't mean the beginning of the documentary. I mean the beginning, when it was first announced. When it was first announced that Chris Hansen had sold his Onision coverage and the concept of an Onision documentary over to Investigation Discovery, it was met with two reactions. The first one being, oh wow, this is going to be terrible. You've already ruined the investigation and now you're just making it worse. And the second one being the same as the first, because most people saw this as a bad move. You see, when Chris had come onto YouTube, when he first started covering the Banana Man himself, he had come on the scene with a lot of promises. He promised that he was going to get to the bottom of the situation. He promised he was going to go above and beyond to show the crimes that Gregory, or whatever his name is today, Jackson, has committed. And he promised, above everything else, that we would see Onision going to prison. He came onto the scene, and the whole entire community who has seen this gone on for years, the entire community who has been a part of this situation, was hyped. We all bought into his statements, only for him to never follow through with any singular thing he has ever promised. He invited YouTubers who had covered Onision for years, like Repsion and Blair White, to pretty much go over everything they had already stated for the past 10 years. That way, Chris Hansen didn't have to research anything himself. He had multiple victims on. That way he could hear their stories without, again, researching any of their publicly available statements beforehand. Not to mention the fact that he had on his Onision experts, which were essentially weird white knights like Heat Boss and Angry Slug Productions, who would come on to talk about how much they hated Greg viscerally and how they made them so upset that they had issues with alcohol. I'm not kidding. That is literally something that happened. Someone came on Chris Hansen's YouTube show to talk about how Onision and simply watching him made him have a problem with drinking. That's a thing that happened this year, guys. Slowly, the community started to get what scientists commonly refer to as the heebie-jeebies about Chris. Slowly but surely, people were starting to question what he was doing by platforming people who were stating things like Onision had literally killed people while they were on his show high. Slowly, people started to wonder if maybe the man who had presented himself as the guy whose life's mission it was to stop predators on television, if maybe he was just the Ryan Seacrest of true crime and wasn't actually capable of doing a diddly darn thing. And those feelings were soon validated when it came out that the one singular time he could have actually helped the criminal investigation in a real way, the one time he was given a task that could have actually helped one of the people who Onision abused get justice, he instead did the opposite and ruined the investigation to the point where it became unlikely that Onision would ever see jail time. Literally, Chris fucked up the investigation so spectacularly, it was almost amazing. Like, it's almost mind-blowing what he did. Like, even I could not have messed up as poorly as Chris Hansen did in this case. And I will be the first one to say that I mess a lot of things up. My mind is mush. But at least I didn't take a laptop that had evidence, literal evidence, of Onision and his husband grooming a minor, give it to my incompetent assistant to keep it for months on end while stating publicly he was going to tamper with it, and then not send it as evidence to the FBI. At least I can cross that off my list of dumb shit that I would have never done, because that's so spectacularly stupid. How? Side note, I need to clarify something, and I don't say this to pat myself or to Mimi on the back, but basically I just want to clear the record because so much misinformation has been spread and it's a lot. A lot of people think that the FBI is working in conjunction with Chris Hansen on both the Onision and Davi Vanity case, and that he got them involved and he is the middleman and he has caused all this action. And that is partially patently untrue. I know this because Tamimi, another amazing YouTuber, came to me with information that needed to be shared with the FBI in regards to the Davi Vanity case, and I showed her how to contact them. Because of that, the FBI investigation into Davi was open and began. It had nothing to do with Chris, and Chris was in no way involved. For some reason, though, he has implied that he started it and he had the connections at the whole time and it was all on him, but that simply is not true. And I don't know why he has misled people into thinking that. I don't know how that happened or how that occurred, but it's just patently false, and I needed to clear that up. By the time the story broke that Chris Hansen himself was working with Investigation Discovery on this documentary, his reputation online had already gone to shit, with idiots like me making multiple videos about how he had ruined the criminal investigation into Onision, and how in response to the fair criticism that was leveled at him, he tried to state that he was being bullied online as an elderly adult man. Alright, his reputation had already gone to shit multiple times over, so it was really no surprise that the majority of people who had been featured on his channel in relation to Onision wanted nothing to do with the documentary itself. Multiple of the victims of Onision publicly posted that they didn't want to be featured and that they wanted nothing to do with this. And that is where we will get into the first fault of the documentary. Because despite the fact that it was publicly stated and implied multiple times that this documentary, Onision in Real Life, was going to use all the information that was given to Chris Hansen and promoted on his platform, regardless of if the victims had consented or not, they actually chose to not do that. They chose to not exploit these girls. They chose to respect the wishes of the victims, which is in fact a great thing. Like, wholeheartedly, I can say I'm impressed with the decision to not include people who didn't want to be a part of it. So why did I list that as the first problem? Well, you see, it's kind of an issue because absolutely none of that was communicated to the victims themselves. And none of that was then communicated to the public. In fact, because the documentary crew had so little outreach to those affected, to this very day, there are people who still think they are going to be telling the stories of the girls who hadn't consented to be a part of the documentary, even though they had decided early on they would not do that. Remember, this isn't just some YouTuber making a video. This is a fancy smancy production with a major network. There is a PR department. There are people whose entire jobs revolve around talking to those affected and communicating what the documentary is supposed to be in detail, communicating what is going on. And you mean to tell me that not one of those people whose job it is to do exactly that thought to tell the girls who are publicly bashing the documentary that they understood where they're coming from and would not be using their stories without permission? You mean to tell me that no one on this entire production thought even once about reaching out to those actually affected by Onision and letting them know, hey, we totally hear you and we're not going to violate your consent by telling your story out of pocket? That's kind of an issue, man, because for months these girls thought that was going to happen, and for months that put an innate level of stress on them. Because of that poor PR and poor communication with the people directly involved in what's going on, multiple people were poisoned to this documentary in the first place. And it was only worsened by the fact that Chris is featured heavily in it. And while the Chris Hansen features are few and far between in the documentary, from the episode I gained access to, it's bad. It's so bad. The fucking levels they go to hype this man up is so ridiculous, it pissed me off. I don't remember the exact quote because I'm not an encyclopedia, but at a certain point, Stephen Asark, who is a reporter who helped produce this hunka burning shit, states that essentially nobody cared about what Onision was doing until Chris Hansen, with his omega dick, jumped onto the scene and exposed him for what he is.
I think when he joined YouTube in 2006, people were overwhelmingly supportive of him being on the platform. It wasn't until Chris Hansen's YouTube story that the overall dialogue started to change.
Like, they play up how much Chris helped so much, and they state that he called this out initially, and I cannot tell you how I almost lost it, because I almost lost it. I mean that. Fun fact, Onision has been on this platform for over 10 years. If Onision's channel were a person, they'd be going through puberty right now. And do you want to know who the first person who ever called him out was? Do you want to know who the first person to ever hold him accountable for his actions was? Repsion. You want to know how I know that? Because I remember when it happened. I remember watching Repsion's first couple of videos about Onision, the ones where he was talking about Greg's treatment of Shiloh, things that were featured in this documentary. And from that point on, I was like, oh, this guy, Onision, Banana Man, whatever we're calling him, he's weird. Not gonna touch him anymore. Do not interact with me. Ew. Also, fun fact, I happen to really not like Daniel based off those videos either, but that's besides the point. To turn around like this documentary does and pretend that Big Daddy Dick Hansen was the first, second, or third person to bring attention to Onision's bullshit, like he created this massive wave about Onision and nobody cared before him, it's pathetic and laughably false. The fact that this documentary tried to squirt that vinegar into our collective pussies as a douche is gross and I hate it. Third point, because I guess the Hansen point was the second point and the other thing was the first point. I'm only on point 3. I don't know how long I've been talking. I don't know. That's pathetic. Here we are. But my third point is the storytelling of this documentary is so fucking hyperbolic and just straight up factually incorrect at times. Specifically, I'm talking about most of the parts that were narrated by Stephen Asark, again, the independent writer who has covered Onision himself and helped produce this documentary. They probably did this for the sake of time because going in depth about the deceitful ways Greg grew his channel and all the ins and outs of that would have probably taken at least 45 minutes in and of itself, but they highly conflate things he did to be bigger than they were at multiple instances. They talk about Greg's first VidCon where he performed his stupid banana songs, and you would think with how they edited it and how they frame it that he played to a sold-out stadium, that this was this massive deal, and it was super massive, but it wasn't. It was like a room in an auditorium, barely on a stage. It's not a thing. Like I said earlier, the entire documentary just feels off because they will say things like nobody cared until Hansen got involved. And they will talk hyperbolically about certain events like him performing his banana song in the hotel room and stating things like that as fact when they aren't. They will conflate issues massively in order to give Chris more credit or to make things feel more sinister. And frankly, with what Greg has done, that speaks for itself. You don't need to conflate things. But they do, repeatedly. And if you are like me and you have spent literal weeks researching the religion/cult that Greg tried to make, or have made a literal timeline of his love life, or have gone over in immense details all his interactions with the one, the only, the blackface Shane Dawson, the documentary glazing over that and just being hyperbolic about what is going on feels entirely gross. It feels skeezy, it feels false, and I don't fucking like it. As someone who has pretty much watched everything that has happened with Onision from the beginning, from the first time he was called out by Repsion, this documentary rings hollow. I think the parts with Shiloh and Greg's dad are fine, but the entire thing felt just wrong to me because there was so much that was purposely left out, so much that was put in order to give Chris a hard-on, and I don't have high hopes for the next episodes. I don't have high hopes for this documentary as a whole. I really don't. Also, the editing. I didn't want to make this a separate point, but the editing of the documentary is just bad. I watch cheeseball true crime shows like this all the time where they do the dramatic reenactments. I even watch ghost hunting shows where they do that stuff, but this just, it was a lot at times. Like the initial shot of, oh, there's a computer in a dark room and it turns on and ooh, it's Onision. Like, come on. Maybe I'm just used to YouTube where people like Nicholas Fiorio and John Swan make full-length features for free, but still, if I had to rate this documentary, I would give it a why are you like this out of 10. This documentary could have been really, really great, but seeing how they didn't have PR, they didn't talk to the victims, they didn't explain their actions, how they conflated Onision's actions, credited everything to Chris Hansen, and were extremely hyperbolic, I just can't get with it. Also, if you are a massive media corporation and you want to email me about getting some free PR, maybe don't, because that's a bad move. Also because I will say no and make fun of you on my channel. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Let me know if you watched the documentary and if you think I'm being a total bitch ass. And with that, I'm out of here. Later.